In 1948, a state was declared that most of the world said could not exist. Too small, too surrounded, too late in history. Some historians suggest it shouldn't have worked. Every force that built it was itself considered impossible. Stand in Jerusalem on an ordinary morning. 3 religions share a city the size of a small town. Ancient stones worn smooth by 2,000 years of hands. A call to prayer echoes across rooftops. Church bells follow. Below the western wall, where people press notes into ancient stone, Jerusalem is not a city that belongs to one story. It belongs to many. And at the center of the most contested of those stories, a state that did not exist in 1947 and did in 1948. How that happened and why it held is one of the most studied questions in modern history. 6 forces made it possible, none of them inevitable, all of them, in their own way, improbable. What the textbooks say. The State of Israel was declared on the 14th of May, 1948. David Ben-Gurion read the declaration in Tel Aviv. The British mandate over Palestine, established after the First World War, had ended. The United Nations partition plan of 1947 had proposed dividing the territory into 2 states, one Jewish, one Arab. The plan was accepted by Jewish leadership and rejected by Arab states. War followed immediately. Israel survived and expanded beyond the partition borders. The official founding narrative describes a people returning to their ancestral homeland after 2,000 years of exile, driven by the catastrophe of the Holocaust and the vision of Zionist pioneers. That narrative is accurate in its broad outline, but the textbooks rarely ask the deeper question: how did a population that had no army, no sovereign territory, and no internationally recognized state in 1900 build all 3 by 1948? 6 forces, each one a story of transformation so unlikely that historians still debate how it happened. Force 1, the memory that survived. Most peoples who lose their homeland lose their identity within a few generations. Language fades. Customs change. Collective memory dissolves into the surrounding culture. The Jewish diaspora lasted 2,000 years, and the memory did not dissolve. The Passover Seder, celebrated annually for millennia, ends with the same words, "Next year in Jerusalem," not as metaphor, as collective intention. Some historians suggest that Jewish survival as a distinct people across 2,000 years of dispersion, persecution, and cultural pressure is itself one of the most remarkable phenomena in recorded history. One interpretation holds that the preservation of Hebrew as a sacred language, studied continuously across the diaspora, even when no one spoke it, as a native tongue maintained a cultural continuity that no other exiled people had managed. The religious calendar, the dietary laws, the annual cycle of commemoration, all of it functioned, some historians suggest, as a portable homeland, a civilization carried not in territory but in practice. The record shows a people who maintained continuous collective identity across 2,000 years of statelessness. What it doesn't show is how close that continuity came to breaking, and what it cost to preserve it. Force 2. The language resurrection. In the 1880s, Hebrew was a language of prayer and scholarship. No one spoke it at home. No one used it to buy bread or argue with a neighbor or tell a joke. It had not been a spoken vernacular for nearly 2,000 years. Eliezer ben Yehuda arrived in Palestine in 1881 with a specific intention: to revive Hebrew as a living language. He raised his son Ben Zion ben Yehuda as the first native Hebrew speaker in modern times. He compiled a dictionary. He invented words for concepts that ancient Hebrew had no terms for: newspaper, dictionary, ice cream. Within 2 generations, Hebrew was the daily language of a growing community. Some linguists suggest this is the only successful revival of a dead language as a native tongue in recorded history. One interpretation holds that the Hebrew revival was not simply a linguistic achievement, it was the creation of a new national identity. A shared language creates a shared world, and a shared world creates the possibility of a shared state. The record shows a language declared dead by history that became the official language of a modern nation within 70 years. What it doesn't show is what kind of determination that required, or what it replaced. Force 3. The agricultural transformation. In the late 19th century, the land that would become Israel was described by multiple Western travelers as largely desolate. Malarial swamps in the north, desert in the south, sparse population throughout. The early Jewish settlers, the Halutzim, the pioneers, arrived with an ideology and a problem. The ideology that Jewish survival required physical labor on the land. The problem: the land was largely uncultivable. They drained the swamps. They planted trees. They developed drip irrigation techniques that would eventually make Israeli agriculture a global export. Some agricultural historians suggest that the transformation of the land undertaken between 1880 and 1948 was among the most rapid and intensive agricultural developments in modern history. One interpretation holds that this transformation was not simply practical, it was ideological. The act of making the land productive was, for the pioneers, a form of national creation. You do not simply live on a land, you build a relationship with it. The record shows a territory that went from sparse agricultural output to significant food production within 2 generations. What it doesn't show is the full complexity of what that transformation meant. For those who were already living there, that complexity is part of the history, and it does not simplify. Force 4. The institutional infrastructure. By the time Israel declared independence in 1948, it already had most of the institutions of a state: a labor federation, the Histadrut, founded in 1920, a school system, a hospital network, a proto-military force, the Haganah, a democratic assembly, the Vaad Leumi, that had been functioning for decades. This was not accidental. The Zionist leadership, particularly David Ben-Gurion, pursued a deliberate strategy of building state institutions before there was a state to house them. Some political historians call this statism the construction of governmental infrastructure as a precondition for sovereignty, rather than a consequence of it. One interpretation holds that Israel's survival in its first years was made possible by institutional preparation that began decades earlier. A state that already functioned before it was declared could resist the pressures that destroyed states declared without functioning institutions. The record shows a movement that built schools, hospitals, courts, and military capacity across 50 years of statelessness. What it doesn't show is how unusual that is. Most liberation movements gain territory first and build institutions after. The sequence matters more than most historians acknowledge. Force 5. The catastrophe that changed everything. The Holocaust killed 6 million Jews, 1/3 of the world's Jewish population. Its relationship to the founding of Israel is historically documented and politically contested. What is documented? The Holocaust transformed international opinion. The 1947 United Nations Partition Plan, approved by the General Assembly with a two-thirds majority, was supported by countries that had, a decade earlier, closed their borders to Jewish refugees. Some historians suggest that without the Holocaust, the partition vote would not have passed, that the moral weight of the catastrophe shifted votes that would otherwise have gone differently. One interpretation holds that Israel's founding was not simply a consequence of Zionist organization, agricultural development, or institutional building, but of a historical tragedy so enormous that it created a moment of international consensus that has never fully been repeated. The record shows a UN vote taken 3 years after the liberation of the concentration camps. What it doesn't show is whether that vote would have been possible in any other historical moment. Perhaps the state that should not have been possible became possible because of the worst thing that had ever happened to the people who built it. That is a weight history does not easily carry. Force 6. The military necessity. Israel was attacked on the day it was declared. 5 Arab armies entered the territory within hours of the independence declaration. By all conventional military assessment, a new state, with improvised forces, facing 5 organized armies, surrounded on all sides, should not have survived. It did. Some military historians suggest that the Israeli forces in 1948 were not, in fact, outmatched. The Haganah had been preparing for exactly this conflict for years. Weapons had been acquired and hidden. Officers had been trained. Tactics had been developed. One interpretation holds that the 1948 war was not a surprise that Israel survived against the odds, but a conflict that the Zionist military leadership had anticipated, prepared for, and in the end won. The record shows a new state that expanded its territory beyond the partition lines during the war and secured armistice agreements with all its neighbors by 1949. What it doesn't show is what that survival cost. On all sides, wars that shape nations rarely end cleanly, and the 1948 war, known in Israeli history as the War of Independence, and in Palestinian history as the Nakba, the catastrophe, is a reminder that the same event can carry 2 entirely different names. Both names are part of the history. Conclusion: 6 forces, none of them sufficient on their own, all of them necessary together, a memory preserved across 2,000 years, a dead language brought back to life, a desolate land made productive, institutions built before there was a state, a catastrophe that shifted the world's moral calculus, and a military force that was ready when it had to be. What makes Israel's founding historically unusual is not any one of these forces. It is their combination and the timing. Each force required decades to develop. All 6 converged in a single decade. That convergence, some historians suggest, was neither inevitable nor accidental. It was the product of a long, deliberate, and costly preparation by a people who had decided that survival required a state, and who built one against the weight of history. The most improbable states are built by people who had no other option. Next, the ancient forces that shaped the Arab world. This video explores history and disputed theories for educational purposes. Sonnet 4.6. Lo,